Ollies on the Flowrider are the most important trick. Today I'm going to show you the secret to what actually makes a board pop out of the water and every little detail needed to pop that ollie up nice and high. I'm going to break down basic ollies into details like you've never heard before. So if you're just starting to learn ollies or you're just running into problems with them, then I'm going to show you all those little secrets needed to get your ollies looking big and beautiful. If that interests you, then stick around. Hey flowboarders, so today we're going to go over the basics of the ollie. Very confusing trick because there are a lot of little important details in making it work. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to first quickly show you all the actual motions of the trick, and then we're going to do a deep dive into all of those little important details that make the trick work and explain why we need to do them. Then we're going to show you where most people have problems and how to correct them. I promise you this will be an eye-opening video, so let's give it a go. So the stance we're going to be using for ollies is the standard skateboard stance that I've gone over in a lot of other videos. If you haven't seen my stance video, then go watch it, because having a good stance is critical for high-level riding. The important takeaway from here is that you need to get your back foot close to that back edge, because to get an ollie to fly out of the water, you need to push your tail into the current. Your board acts as a lever with the tail edge as the pivot point. So the further back your foot is on the board, the easier it's going to be to do ollies. If you ride with your back foot further up on the board, then you'll get less angle on your board, which will result in less height to your ollies. It's going to be much harder to pop these things out of the water. Now, two little hacks that you can try at first that may make things a little bit easier are bringing your front foot back on the board a little bit, because it makes it easier to get the board more diagonal. The second one is getting your front foot edge a little bit more perpendicular, because it feels a little bit easier to keep the board straighter in the air. You don't have to do either of these, but at first you can play around with them and see if they help a little bit. Once you get the hang of ollies, you're just going to be launching them out of the standard skateboard stance. Now, to do a good ollie, there are some key elements that need to happen every time, and they need to happen at very precise moments during the trick. I'll show you those using these two chairs, and the black riser is going to act as the water current. So you're first going to squat down a little bit and get into a starting position. Then jump your body up into the air using both feet equally. At the very last moment, when your knees are still slightly bent, you're going to get the board diagonal by pulling your front foot up and pushing your tail foot down into the current. This will launch your board out of the water. Now you want to quickly bring both of your knees up into your chest as high as you can get them. Once your feet and board level out, you're going to immediately push your board back down to the ground using both feet at the same time. That's basically how you do an ollie, so let's do that deep dive and break it all down. By the way, using two chairs to practice this ollie motion is a great way to develop your muscle memory, because you can start off slowly and work it up to speed. First, let's take a look at the jump itself. One of the biggest mistakes that beginners do is that they're doing the wrong kind of jump. They're jumping for maximum height, and they're stretching their body out as if they're trying to measure their vertical. So let's make this really easy. The jump is the exact same jump as if you were jumping onto a curb. So we're bringing our body up into the air a little bit, but what we're really concentrating on is trying to pull our legs and feet up as high as they can go so that we land on top of the curb. So this is important. What really determines the height of an ollie? It's not determined by how high we can get our whole body up into the air, but rather it's determined by how high we can get our feet up off the ground. So if I stand between the two chairs and I pull my feet up about 1.5 feet, then this is a 1.5 foot ollie. That's a high ollie. But notice my upper body doesn't change height at all when I'm moving my feet up and down. When you look at these two jumps side by side, you'll see that Stan probably jumps a little bit higher than I do, but my board is so much higher because I'm pulling my knees up into my chest as close as I can get them, versus he's all stretched out. So then why do we even have to jump at all? The reason that we need to jump is so that we can get our upper body to kind of hang out in the air for about a second, which is going to buy us enough time to pull our legs up underneath us and then set them back down again to complete the ollie. So this is my height as I'm standing straight up riding, and this is my height as I'm jumping doing an ollie. My head is pretty much at the same height. So when I do an ollie, all I'm really doing is bringing my knees up. Now, when we jump, we're trying to accomplish two totally separate things. In the first part of the jump, we're getting our upper body into the air like we talked about before. And then in the second part of the jump, which occurs at the very last moment, we need to make our board pop out of the water by getting it diagonal. So, first thing we're going to do is get our upper body into the air for a moment. What we do is we bend our knees and we squat down just a little bit, and this is our starting position right here. Then we jump up like we're jumping up on that curb. Now, a lot of people teach this, that you're actually bouncing or pushing down hard on both your feet at the same time, like this. But that's not what you want to do. You don't want to push your legs down hard into the ground, but instead what you want to do is you want to jump your upper body into the air using as little downward pressure as possible. Smashing your board into the ground versus jumping up into the air are two totally different movements. Since this is where so many people have problems with ollies, we're going to go over this in depth in our troubleshooting section. Remember, this first part of the jump has absolutely nothing to do with getting the board out of the water. It only has to do with getting your upper body to hang up in the air for a moment. So let's get sidetracked for a minute and discuss what really makes your board pop out of the water. To totally understand this, let's first talk about what doesn't make your board pop out of the water. I commonly hear two different methods given, and with great love and respect to those who teach them, I will have to disagree with both of those techniques. The first one is that you can bounce your board out of the water by pushing down on it so hard that it'll come up and magically follow your feet. Now, even though the Flowrider surface is a trampoline-like tarp, it's not going to give you enough springing action for a good ollie. You can push down extremely hard on your board all you want, and it may get you an inch or two out of the water, but it's not the technique that's going to give you a decent ollie. Now, the second method to pop your board out of the water that people talk about is sliding your front foot forward with your board at an angle, and that will supposedly raise the height of the board. This comes from skateboarding. You really can't slide your foot on the top of a board and make it go upward and higher. It just doesn't work that way. What sliding your foot is actually used for is to level out your board, especially in skateboarding, and we'll talk more about foot sliding in a moment. So then, what actually does make a board pop out of the water? It's basically the pressure of the water pushing against your board as your board is in a diagonal position, and that water pressure is going to make the board shoot up out of the water. Remember, there's so much pressure in the water current that it can knock a person off their feet and then easily sweep them over the top. So it's very easy for this water current to make a small 5-pound board fly up towards shoulder height. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be using this water pressure to pop the board up out of the water. So let's get sidetracked a little bit more, and we're going to talk about water buildup under your board. Mike Pappy first sent me down this rabbit hole when I was listening to him teaching someone a trick. And he was talking about how when you angle your board by pushing down on the tail, you can actually feel water buildup under it right in this area here. So with Ollies, when we push our tail down into the current, it blocks the water under the board and creates a turbulence there, which feels like the water is building up under your board. It actually moves in this circular motion. And what you do is you use the pressure of the water pushing your board up, and you ride that water buildup out of the water. Now, I just want to show you this water buildup on video. What I do is I angle the board and then push the tail into the current, and you can see how the water builds up under the board. The more I push the tail into the water, the higher the water will build up and spray out. Now, when I push my board against this water buildup, it easily pops out of the water. Here are some still pictures of national champ Monica Caffrey and Jordan Walter doing Ollies, and you can actually see this water buildup, which launches their boards out of the water. Now, you're not always going to see this much water buildup when you launch your board, but just a small amount of water current hitting the tail end of your board is more than enough to make it pop out of the water for a really nice Ollie. And by the way, that's the exact same way that it works when you're splashing water on a boogie board. So let's get back to our jump and talk about getting the board to pop out of the water. We've now squatted down a little bit into our starting position and are jumping upward, applying equal pressure to our feet. And we get to this point here where our upper body is now moving up into the air and we're about to pull our knees up. At this critical moment where our knees are still just a little bit bent right here, we need to pop the board into the air by getting the board diagonal so that the current can hit the tail and pop it upward. So at this moment, we pull our front foot upward while we keep pushing our back foot downward into the current. This is the last moment that we have pressure on the board just before we totally unweigh it. Now, this is a really important detail here. It's probably the most important takeaway in doing a good Ollie. The way that you get the board to pop out of the water is by driving the tail into the current. To get higher Ollies, you want to push the tail down deeper into the current and trap more water. Now, the water current is going to smash into that angled board and apply upward pressure to it. So now we have to quickly bring our back foot up to give the board the space that it needs to shoot upward. If you don't give it room to move upward, then your feet are just going to smother the Ollie right there. So pull both of your knees up as far into your chest as you can. Your board should level out on its own. What it feels like is that you're clicking this in and then pulling up immediately. So it's literally click, pull up, click, pull up, click, pull up. Now, let's get sidetracked again and talk about if sliding your front foot is necessary. What sliding your foot does is it levels out the board in the air, but it does absolutely nothing to help pop the board upward. This foot sliding technique comes from skateboarding, where it's absolutely necessary to be used to level out the board, because to ollie a skateboard, you need to pop the tail into the ground, so your skateboard will be launching upward at this severe angle. So a skater will need to level out his board by sliding his front foot forward. But in flowboarding, your board is usually at about a 45-degree angle. So just by having your front foot on the front half of the board as it's moving upward will cause the back tail end to swing up and level out on its own. Now, I personally do not slide my foot. When I watch the pros do ollies, some of them slide them and some of them don't. Some of the pros even slide them for some of their ollies, but not for other ones. I personally don't slide my foot because it gives me a very loose feeling between my feet and the board, and I like the feeling of that board just sticking to my feet. But when I do see people sliding their front foot, it just looks so stylish. Now, if you're going to be doing foot sliding, then there are two ways to slide your feet. The first one is that you slide both your feet forward and then you land with both of your feet forward. and then you have to move them back into riding position. The second method is where you slide your front foot forward to level out the board and then slide it back in the air before you land. Since your back foot never moves, you'll automatically be back in riding position when you land. So try doing ollies, both sliding your foot and not sliding it, and see what works best for you. So let's get back to our jumping motion. We've now jumped our upper body into the air, and at the last moment, we angled our board to pop it out of the water, and we brought our knees up as close to our chest as we can. Now, to land this thing, all we have to do is push the board back down into the water. To create pressure and maintain the contact between your board and your feet, you have to push it down faster than gravity can pull it down. The only real area that I see people get into trouble with at this point is that they're trying to hold on to that compact position in the air and ride it out for as long as they can, and then the board starts to float away from them. You're only in that compact position for like a split second. As your board is still moving upward, you're going to start pushing it back down before it ever has a moment to stop moving upward. Ollies are actually done very quickly. You're not just magically floating in the air and your board is floating along with you in that cool compact pose. Rather, you're popping that board up and then pushing it down real fast. So that's all the dirty little details on the basic motion for an ollie. Once again, practice this between two chairs to build up that muscle memory. Practice this really slowly at first and then work up to a normal speed. That's really going to help a lot. Now let's talk about where on the wave you throw the ollie and the timing. The easiest place to learn them is at the bottom of the transition. I would learn them in that area first, and then as you get better, start taking them up towards the top of the wave. At first, you'll be doing them in a straight line, so you'll be going straight up the wave, ollie, and then come straight down. As you get more advanced, you can throw them across the wave because they look much better that way, and everything you throw across the wave is a lot more fun to do. I prefer doing mine down the wave, and I set them up by doing a quick frontside carve to straighten me out and then throw the ollie. Usually the hardest place to do them is down in the flats, but it's always good to learn every trick everywhere on the wave. Do what feels best for your riding style. Now, the timing of the trick is really important. Usually you want to throw it just after the pause point as you're starting to move forward. So you're going to be standing up, moving up the wave, and you want to time it so that just as you get to that pause point, you're going to drop and bend your knees so that you're in that ready starting position. Then, just as you start to move forward, that's when you're going to jump upward and pop the ollie. So you're actually just starting to move forward a little bit. Now, when you're doing them across the wave, that pause point will come at the top of your arc across the wave. And just as you start moving downward, that's the moment where you're going to throw the ollie. Now, as a beginner, the main points to concentrate on are the timing of getting your board diagonal at the very last moment of your jump by digging your tail into the current and then quickly unweighing your board as you pull your knees up into your chest. At first, your board barely has to come out of the water. Then you want to slowly start increasing the height of the ollie by pulling your feet up quicker and higher. At first, you're probably going to be doing rocket ollies where your board never levels out. You're kind of doing a wheelie the whole time. But once you get these motions down, then the last thing you'll need to fix is bringing your back foot up more so that you're not doing rocket ollies anymore. You're going to need to do lots and lots of reps. And what you're doing is you're developing the muscle memory for all these precise movements and the feeling for trapping the water and using it to launch the board up into the air. Also, a great technique to help your ollies is to try to touch your board when you're doing these, because that'll force you to get compressed as you try to raise your board up to touch it. So that's it for basic ollies. I got lots more ollie stuff to share with you guys, so check out those videos. Now, it's time to get off the couch, get down to your local wave, and try some of this stuff out. Remember to keep it fun.